The last topic I want us to look at with the Industrial Revolution is some of the causes and effects. We know that the Industrial Revolution had a huge impact on American history, but we want to look into some of the things that led into that industrial process. And then, of course, we want to look at some of the things that occurred coming out of industrialization. So what I want you to keep in mind is, what were some causes and effects of the Industrial Revolution? Keep that guided question in mind as we go throughout this presentation. So I put together a chart, and in this chart you see some of the causes of the Industrial Revolution, their short-term effects, and their long-term effects. So short-term effects might have been over the period of 20 years, while the long-term effects might be effects that we are still seeing today. So the first of the causes is an abundance of natural resources. We were spreading west, so we had all of this new land and we had all of this space to grow things on. This is going to cause a greater agricultural production. The problem with this greater agricultural production is the greater demand for food and the greater demand for using of those natural resources, which in the long term causes an elimination of natural resources, which is something that you still see people moving or talking about today, especially with the environmental movement. Inventions. Good thing about that short-term effect was that it sped things up. Our nation was moving faster. We were going places faster. We were communicating faster. So things were going very well. And the effect of that long-term speeding things up is the creation of factories and businesses that needed to produce these inventions so that the common America can afford them. Steam-driven locomotives were something that we really didn't talk about very much, but it's an important piece of the Industrial Revolution. It created competition in the railroad construction. We talked about the Chinese immigrants and how they were needed in the transcontinental process. Okay, that led to some enhanced transportation. So we're get that transcontinental railroad going from the East Coast to the West Coast is going to be the first example of Americans moving from one end of the nation to the other end of the nation. And it is going to encourage this spirit of moving westward and traveling and seeing what our nation has to offer. Increased factory production. The short-term effect of that is urbanization, and we're going to talk about urbanization a little bit more, but that's the process of people moving from rural America into the big cities, which is going to lead to the long-term effect of some of the big cities that we see today. London and New York were both products of this urbanization during the Industrial Revolution. So I said that we were going to speak a little bit more about urbanization, which, like I said, was the movement of people from rural communities into the cities. So this is a result of the growth of the factory system. Factories had to be centrally located for the resources that were around them. The coal, the water, whatever that energy source was. Factories paid higher wages than the farms, which caused people to want to move into those cities so they could work in the factories. And new farming equipment really replaced the need for manual labor. So we didn't need the slaves from the South as much, and we really didn't need paid labor either on those farms. So those people had to find jobs, and those jobs existed in the factories. Some of the hazards of urbanization, the things that had negative effects on our cities. First of all, so many people were moving at such a quick rate that we did not have proper sanitation in our cities. There were no sewers, there was waste in the streets, and it was really hard to fix the problem once we had already started the process of overcrowding those cities. Crime is going to be an issue. We have parents working for one of the first times in American history. Both the mother and the father were working at the same time, and kids were kind of left to run around, which led to crime. Disease all came back to this poor sanitation and the number of people that were living in a small area. And then poor housing conditions, mainly the tenement houses. You had multiple families living in a one-bedroom apartment all together with their kids and their grandparents and everything else. So it's going to be a difficult lifestyle. All of this, though, the negative effects of urbanization, but there are some positive effects that came out of it as well. Museums, theaters, stores are all going to become a part of these big cities, and it's going to attract more and more people in the middle class to these urban areas. So the short-term effects of industrialization, and this, guys, like I said, is in the 20, 30 years following the industrial period. We're going to see the growth of the middle class. Skilled workers, professionals, business people, wealthy farmers. We're going to see an increase of the wealth of factory owners and bankers. Now, we see some of this middle class still existed today. So that was neat to watch this type of people moving into America and becoming a part of our society. Negative was disparity in the working class. People replaced by machinery. And there were a lot of people who felt very strongly that they shouldn't be replaced by these machines. So we're going to see riots forming outside of factories. You're going to see some of your first labor unions forming as well. But the majority of what this is talking about is that there were many people who really felt discouraged by the fact that manual labor was no longer needed in the United States. And then finally, the long-term positive effects of the Industrial Revolution. Job creation is the biggest thing. Many jobs that Americans still are in today are a result of the Industrial Revolution. It fostered a technological process and innovation. So that idea of the American dream, you can create something, you can do what you want to do, and it's okay. Increased production of goods, and it raised the standard of living. That idea of ready-to-wear clothing and going to be able to buy, bread at the store instead of make it. Those were all parts of that standard of living that increased during the Industrial Revolution. All of this eventually led to healthier diets, better housing, cheaper clothing, all of the things that we are seeing today. People became aware of, began to eat more of those breads that were mass-produced, more of the vegetables that were mass-produced. It was cheaper to get that stuff. Better housing, okay? Cheap clothing, like we've already talked about. We're going to see an expansion in education because people needed to be trained for their jobs, especially clerical and professional jobs. Before this, education wasn't necessary unless you were in the higher class, but now these middle classes are going to have a desire to be educated. And then the organization of labor unions. Those labor unions are going to fight for many of the things that are important to us today, including higher wages, shorter work hours, and better working conditions. So when we celebrate Labor Day, we are celebrating these rights that we have as individuals. So guys, keep in mind these causes and effects and have these notes in class tomorrow so that you're prepared for our discussion. Good luck.